He describes 3 successive nights spent at Mulholland, sitting on his bed, holding a revolver at some points with the muzzle in his mouth. Unlike other Hollywood suicides, he will not pull the trigger. Not right away, but his decision to live on sets the course for the remaining 13 years of his life as he slowly and deliberately kills himself. He's talking about how he basically felt like he was entertainment for the world during his trial. A new legend was born, and new terms went into the national idiom. A GI or Marine or sailor went out at night sparking, and the next day he reported to his cronies, who asked him how he made out the night before, and the fellow would say with a sly grin, "I'm in like Flynn." Well, hello everyone, I'm Jennifer and welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to get into episode 8 of Errol Flynn Slept Here, and this chapter is chapter 6 and it's called In Like Flynn. If you've ever heard that phrase before and you don't know where it comes from Errol Flynn. And in the last episode, we talked about the trial that destroyed Errol Flynn's life. In the last video, episode 7, what did I title it? I titled it, how he aged 10 years in 21 days. And this man aged a decade in 21 days during the course of this statutory rape trial in Los Angeles. And I talked about it in the last video where Errol looked at his life pre-statutory rape trial and post-statutory rape trial. And this was the trial in 1943 that definitively changed this man for the absolute worst. His hedonistic lifestyle was pretty much dialed up tenfold. He became much more reckless in his behavior, in his drinking, his dalliances with women. You would think that he would buy himself a clue and maybe start to live a more simple and pure and moral life after this. I mean, at least for him. But no. He just really, I think, mentally and physically just gave up. Physically, meaning he just drank and did all types of things into excess up until his death in 1959 at age 50. So he was basically just trashing his body, didn't care. But mentally, I really do feel like he gave up on life as well. And there's a few passages that I want to read to you from his autobiography, My Wicked, Wicked Ways. And I think that they exemplify this. They exemplify the way that this man gave up on himself, mentally and physically. So it's a tragedy. It's a real tragedy. He had such promise. He was handsome. He was witty. He was charming. He was talented. He was athletic. He had a zest for life, but he just basically threw it all away. I don't really think that Errol was necessarily a bad man or an evil man. I think he was a very misguided, lonely, and morally depraved man. He didn't really have a moral compass. He didn't have anything to cling to. Unfortunately, in my opinion, it was especially tragic because he didn't have God in his life. He was an atheist his entire life. There were a few passages from the Bible that he quoted in the very beginning of his book, which I found somewhat promising and keeps this man on my prayer list. Personally, as a Catholic Christian, I think he's probably in purgatory somewhere needing prayers. So I'm going to go ahead and do that for the soul of Errol. But today we're going to get into chapter 6 in Like Flynn. So let's get going. Also, really quick, if you haven't seen the last episode, episode 7, it does detail the statutory rape trial, what Errol did and the way that he engaged with women. He was just beyond what you would even call a womanizer. I mean, this man literally had women throwing themselves at him 24/7. Mulholland Farm and Mulholland House was party central back in the day, back in the late 30s to early to mid 40s. And he just had dozens and dozens of women at any given time when he was throwing these parties up there, constantly throwing themselves at him. And, he even says in his book, I cannot help myself when a beautiful woman throws herself at me. I have no inclination to not react. For him, it was almost just like breathing. And he really loved women, but at the same time, I really think that he feared them, didn't trust them, and didn't want to get close to them. And that harkens back to the tumultuous and sometimes just violent relationship that he had with his mother growing up. She used to beat him, and he documented that in his autobiography. So it was a very, very complicated, kind of just mentally tortuous way that he looked at women. Now, the two girls in question at the time of the alleged incidents, one was 17, Betty Hansen, and the other one, Peggy Satterley, her age is constantly being called into question in everything I've read and looked at. Some people say that she was over 20 or at least 21 at the time that Errol allegedly raped her. Personally, everything that I've read, everything that I see, did he have sex with those girls? Absolutely. Was he checking birth certificates and being, smart about it? Absolutely not. But like beyond being smart about it, I mean, the man really had no morals when it came to women and just sexual activity. And it was just, it was sad. It was really sad. Nothing on the level of, say, a Diddy, like absolutely not. I mean, it's sad to say that looking at the whole Diddy debacle makes Errol just look almost like a pilgrim in some respects, because he was at least just, more garden variety relations kind of thing. But anywho, I digress. And I have still a little bit of a sinus infection going on, you guys. So I apologize if I clear my throat in this one. But yeah, so, I'm not excusing his behavior by any stretch. I personally think it is morally depraved. That's why I pray for this man's soul. That's not how you should be conducting yourself. And the man should have kept it in his pants, because if he had, he wouldn't have found himself in these horrible situations. But do I think that he was the type to knock a woman unconscious or forcibly, force her into a sexual act? No, I don't. I just see him as just, hey, someone's ready and willing. It doesn't really matter. Oh yeah, they look kind of young, whatever. And it's just, that was his downfall. Okay guys, so let's get back into the book. Errol Flynn Slept Here, the Flynns, the Hamblins, Rick Nelson, and the most notorious house in Hollywood. This is chapter 6 in Like Flynn, and Flynn has just been acquitted of statutory rape charges in a Los Angeles courtroom. So this is right after his acquittal, and let's get into it. Errol Flynn doesn't know at once that Hollywood has scorned him, not until he returns to Mulholland and throws a party. I thought I ought to start living again, seeing people, find out who my friends were, he will recall in My Wicked, Wicked Ways. Mulholland House was loaded with flowers, liquor, lights. I invited just about everybody in the community to come to my house for an evening of fun. Along about the middle of the evening, I realized practically no one was coming. Reports Buster Wiles, quote, "It was a dismal flop," end quote. In mid-February 1943, Errol Flynn learns where an accused rapist, acquitted or not, stands in Hollywood. He begins to understand that one doesn't celebrate the beating of a rape charge. One endures it. An awful feeling settles in as if he puts it all together, from his role as a pawn between J.L. Warner and Los Angeles City Hall to his squandering of a productive career through participation in a series of meaningless dalliances. And that's exactly what I was talking about. Like, he was just so careless. It's just really sad. He recently completed Edge of Darkness, having commenced production prior to the rape charge and wrapped before the start of the trial, will be released in 2 months and contains a powerhouse lineup of Hollywood talent under the direction of Louis Milestone, including Ann Sheraton, Walter Houston, Judith Anderson, Ruth Gordon, and a cast of hundreds. On the other hand, his next picture, Northern Pursuit, is a grim adventure to be set in the frigid Canadian North, with Raoul Walsh directing on a shoestring. Flynn's co-star will not be a glamour girl like Olivia de Havilland. Instead, he gets poor Julie Bishop, a competent but failed 1930s actress struggling in an attempted comeback. It's not just Flynn who's suffering. The entire studio is dark at the moment. A February 22nd, 1943 wire from J.L. Warner to the New York office advises, quote, "There's nothing shooting at studio now. This first time in 15 years that studio is dark. Next week we start 2 pictures, one starting doubtful, just cannot get people to work. Account salary, ceiling hysteria in everyone's mind, account world conditions, etc." End quote. So this was, World War II is they're in the midst of it. And the studio, for the first time in 15 years at that time in 1943, had gone dark. It was just a really dark time for the world and, in the US and everywhere. And it's even touching La La Land, that this place where these people are just so rich and privileged and insulated and all that. And it's even hitting Hollywood. Although I will say back in the day, And part of me, I don't know. I don't want to say I wished I was alive during wartime, but what I love to see is how the entire country rallied behind the war effort. And you didn't have sides warring with each other, say, the way you had in the 1960s during the Vietnam War. And, not to get all into politics, but just to say that everybody was really, really banding together for the war effort. And Hollywood banded together. A lot of the actors were flying all over, promoting, war bonds. They were going and they were entertaining troops at USO locations all over Europe and in the Pacific and things. So it was really cool to see everyone just really come together. Okay, it says, Jack Warner sits in his office in Burbank and, within the cauldron of World War, ponders problems great and small. And among his headaches is the Warner's bad boy, Errol Flynn, who is now missing work because he claims that the fake snow used on the soundstage on the film Northern Pursuit has infected his lungs. What the hell do you do with a tarnished, hypochondriac movie star under contract to your studio for 7 long, bitter, and potentially unprofitable years? Errol was a little boy we had midwifed into the motion picture world, says J.L. Warner. We had changed his diapers and gotten him his first long pants. We also had millions of dollars tied up in finishing pictures, to say nothing of the film still to be shot. And I talked about this in one of my other episodes. I don't know how. Errol was so charming and such a sweet talker. They had talked about earlier in the book that Errol had been paid by Warner Brothers for movies he hadn't even shot yet. So that was really crazy. I don't think anybody in Hollywood would do that now, but somehow, some way, Errol made that happen. So, they had thrown a lot of money, millions into this man, and they were like, okay, phew, like he just, survived a rape trial, but now he's acting like, a hypochondriac, and he's refusing to work, and he's doing all this. So Errol was constantly at loggerheads with the studio. He just didn't like the idea that people were controlling him. He's a Tasmanian devil, right? He will not be constrained. So here's an example of Errol just not letting anyone control him. And he's always fighting with J.L. Warner, the head of Warner Brothers. It says, oh, and one more problem J.L. has to consider. Flynn refuses to talk to the press or cooperate in any way with his own studio's PR department. The studio must devise a long-term strategy to save its multi-million-dollar investment. The solution they decide upon is to reinvent Errol Flynn by crafting a new, serious, introspective persona, focusing not on movies, not on charity work, not on the war. The spotlight of a major campaign to save Errol Flynn's image will shine on a place untouched by the rape scandal, Mulholland Farm. In late 1943, Warner's photographer Bert Six, camera assistants, a lighting team, a wardrobe specialist, and a makeup artist congregate at Mulholland Farm to photograph Errol Flynn at home. It is an elaborate, immaculately lit, multiple-day shoot in black and white and Kodachrome. Bert Six shoots wide on the house with Flynn seated by the pool. Six poses Flynn sitting on his diving board and playing with his Doberman and tending his animals and walking the property. They move inside. Flynn, looking pensive or revealing a hint of a smile, is shown in almost every room except the bedroom. He dresses in a sport jacket and slacks in some of the photos, and in others he is clothed casually in a button-down navy shirt, gray pleated slacks, and brown slip-on loafers. At no time does Flynn pose with women. There are no cut-up or gag shots. He is seen in the living room in formal and casual portraits with wardrobe changes. He poses in front of his I always say this wrong, gangrene, oh gosh, I can never say that, I'm sorry, and his Van Gogh, and fiddles with the radio phonograph under his Manet, and he leans on the mantle besides the Moody Decker portrait, and that was his self-portrait that he had hanging over his fireplace. He is photographed in front of the bar, but definitely not behind it, and then seated at the desk in his den, deep in thought, and in his easy chair with a book open in his lap and a dog at his feet. Framed images, a stackpole photo of Flynn taken in the rigging of Sirocco from the 1938 Life magazine shoot, and an inscribed portrait of FDR sit behind him on the naughty low pine shelf. And that stackpole photo that the author is talking about, from what I've read, was Errol's favorite picture ever taken of himself. He was a seaman. He loved his yachts. He loved sailing. And that's where he felt most alive and at peace, when he was out at sea. So it says, in the book, it's showing a picture of Errol posing in front of his Van Gogh. And it says, Flynn poses beside his Van Gogh, popularly known as the Man at Sea, during the Burt Six photo shoot of February 1943. So this is like probably days after this man was acquitted of rape. I mean, the studio wasted no time in trying to get his reputation back up into the public eye, because Errol even talks about it in the book. He said that when he would read accounts of the trial, he was actually mad that they didn't say that it was a statutory rape trial. They just kept calling it rape, because he really felt that they were not actually being fair in the way that they were reporting it. And he goes into detail in the book, and I talk about this in the last episode, about how absurd he feels that law is, basically, and the way he reasons himself out of this moral dilemma, right, is he says, well, what if you encountered someone who is 17 or 16 or whatever, she tells you she's 21, she looks very mature, then you have relations, and then later, what happens if she accuses you? Even though she lied under statutory rape laws in California at that time, and I don't know if they've changed since, but at that time in 1943, he would still be arrested, or could be arrested and charged. So in his mind, that's exactly what happened. He was just very, very unfairly accused. So yeah, this is what's going down. Warner Brothers is wasting no time. They have got to get this man held in higher esteem with the public. So it says, then Six photographs the entire house upside and down from nearly every corner without Flynn in view. The 6 photos show that time seems to be healing the wounds. Flynn has endured the rape tag, although a new phase enters the American Lexicon that translates to scoring with a girl in Like Flynn. Warner Brothers releases Northern Pursuit, and then the all-star Thank Your Lucky Stars. Burt Six's photos of Flynn at Mulholland are used in publicity for Lucky Stars and show America a side of the bad boy they haven't seen. Flynn begins to allow a few interviews, but only if he approves of the writers. A July 1944 article in Screen Stars magazine entitled Master of Mulholland Farm takes readers on a photographic tour of the house as seen through the Burt Six lens. The late 1944 issue of Movie Land includes 4 more captioned Burt Six photos in an article called Is It Fate with Flynn? Flynn takes part in a much publicized and highly successful celebrity tour of U.S. military installations in the Aleutians. He invests in Mulholland parties like the one in July 1944 that welcomes drinking buddy Bruce Cabot back from military service. This is Mulholland as it has never been, the place he envisioned before the trial. Cabot's party becomes a prestigious 3-mogul triumph that includes not only Jack and Ann Warner, Jack, the head of Warner Brothers, and Daryl and Virginia Zanuck, but David Selznick, along with Mary Pickford and Buddy Rogers, newlyweds Burgess Meredith and Paulette Goddard, Elsa Maxwell, Kay Francis, and dozens of others. Those were the really, really heavy-hitting A-listers back in the day, all those names. They dine on suckling pig and ice cream, dance under the stars, and enjoy a show in the pool by professional swimmers and divers. It is one of the most memorable Hollywood parties of the war years, as well as Flynn's triumphant return to grace. And then there's a picture of Errol in his house in Mulholland Farm, and it says, in his living room, Flynn lounges on the table by the window. As noted in the studio caption, the chintz draperies are of green and cream. And if you know anything about chintz, you will love my Joan Crawford series. There's an episode there where I love Joan. She gives vintage decorating advice, and she talks about chintz pillows and chintz, upholstery and drapery and things like that. And I remember that word growing up. I remember, in the 80s, late 70s, early 90s, my mom using that phrase chintz, and it's kind of a cute vintage phrase. But his restless soul courts danger at every turn. Here, on this glorious summer day, he goes public with his new love, Nora Eddington, a cigarette girl, now 19. She was 18 when he met her, who had been working at the Hall of Justice during the trial. Yes, the man spotted a cute little 18-year-old green-eyed redhead working the cigarette counter. And he would pass by it every day during the rape trial. And he, during the rape trial, asks this girl and a friend of hers up to Mulholland Farm. And he writes in the book that, he was very respectful and he had to be on the up and up because he knew that everyone was reading everything in the papers and everything. But he just couldn't resist himself. She was just so cute. And he was like, making a point to say, and I really, really made sure that she was 18 and all that. But I'm like, dude, like, why? Jeez, Errol, I don't know. This man. But he ended up marrying Nora Eddington. That was her name. But we'll get into that, okay? So it says, guests eye Flynn's new paramour suspiciously. So she's been hanging out there at the house. She's a good-looking redhead, riding the edge of plump, and she's very young. 14 years younger than Flynn, in fact. What the guests at the party don't know is that she's also 3 months pregnant in what would become, if Flynn isn't careful, another messy scandal that might confirm his attraction to teenage girls and validate the claims of accusers Hansen and Satterley. But the whispers remain whispers, and the party becomes another verse in the ballad of Errol Flynn. Yes, he liked his girls young. He's famously quoted as saying he likes... Did he say whiskey or liquor? He likes his whiskey old and his women young. Okay. Flynn's association with Nora Eddington, toxic from its inception, reflects the dark night into which he is passing. I never would be a boon to any woman dreaming of domestic bliss, he will say later. I had, after all, met Nora during the rape trial and agreed to marry her shortly thereafter because she was pregnant. There was little in the situation to make me inwardly contrivial to our marriage, end quote. Flynn seems intent on sabotaging his life as fast as Warner Brothers is trying to save it. The studio has supported this new focus on Mulholland and also Flynn's participation in the USO tour and a Bond tour to New Orleans. At the studio, he invests his talent into an anti-heroic character, Jean Piccard, in the Raoul Walsh picture Uncertain Glory. It is the first film released as a Thompson picture, with Flynn the producer. In retrospect, it shows Flynn, the actor at his finest, underplaying a difficult role, salting it with his own ambiguous personality. The film receives a cool reception. His next picture is the rugged World War II adventure Objective Burma. And that's one of his more famous war pictures. Here he spends weeks on location, loses weight, goes down with a reoccurrence of malaria, and watches as the film is blindsided by pans upon its February 1945 release. And he contracted malaria in the jungles of New Guinea when he was 18, 19, 20 years old, and he struggled with bouts of malaria his entire life. And if you have not listened to the first few episodes where we chronicle Errol's early years before Hollywood, everything he did in his 25 years before he landed in Hollywood, you've got to listen to him because I'm telling you, it's crazy. He got malaria while he was hanging around with headhunters and dodging, spears and arrows from natives in the jungles of Guinea. And back in the, mid to late 20s, it was like the Wild West out there. It was everything that you imagine it to be when you think of the jungles in, the late 19th century, early 20th century. It was an untamed whole thing out there. And he even was involved in a trial for murder because he got off on self-defense, but that was all during those New Guinea days in the bush, in the jungle. So crazy, crazy stuff, y'all. Okay, so we're talking about his film Objective Burma, okay? And it's released in 1945, February. The story of American paratroopers raiding a Japanese base is a tense reworking of the 1940 film Northwest Passage. Reviews in the U.S. press are excellent, but the British press and military scream bloody murder. Lord Louis Mountbatten calls a press conference and denounces Objective Burma as, quote, a loathsome American production that degrades the British, end quote. The criticism has nothing to do with Flynn's work. The British are offended because it is they who have found the Japanese in Burma, not the Americans in real life versus what they depicted in the film. But for Flynn, it is another contaminated enterprise. Flynn's picture after Objective Burma is San Antonio, a Texas Western, and Flynn hates to make Westerns. But they are also inside touches, as when a beautiful senorita is surprised by Flynn and his friend while taking a bath and flees screaming, "Don't run away, honey," he calls, flashing his grin and leering. "We won't look." Yeah, that's literally something he would probably say even if he didn't have a camera on him. As early as May 1944, during production of Burma, a new project is discussed, a picture for Flynn about the legendary lover Don Juan. It will be Robin Hood hits adolescence, with Flynn buckling swashes while giving a nod to his off-screen exploits as a very naughty ladies' man. It's also a way for the studio to use its troublesome leading man to best business advantage, and J.L. Warner loves the idea. Perhaps because the studio executives are so high on the idea, Flynn balks. Flynn often balks, studio papers reveal, and jumps at every chance to make the powers that be squirm. See, anytime he perceives that he is under someone's thumb or under control, he's going to act out, and he's going to just stomp his feet, and he is not going to do what they want him to do. But fate intervenes in the form of Lily Demita. Lily Demita was his first wife, the famous French silent film star. So yeah, she's quite the character. We talk about her in some of the episodes too. She was notoriously just crazed, and they would get in these drop down, knock down violent fights, and she would like throw things at him. She broke a bottle of champagne on his head one time, almost knocked him dead. So he called her Tiger Lil. So it says, she hears all this talk of her ex-husband's extravagant parties, blockbuster films, and new production company, the same guy who can't write a monthly alimony check. On November 28, 1944, a memo to Jack Warner reads, quote, "Errol Flynn will probably be hauled to court on the Lily Demita case. He has renewed his request now to pick up a couple of weeks' salary to make settlement and avoid the embarrassment and publicity that will ensue. Do you want to reconsider in light of his agreeing to be a good boy on Don Juan and accept?" End quote. So this is, Errol's side, people working for him, trying to get an advance from JL because old Tiger Lil's going after him with her alimony. And apparently this woman fought this man his entire life. He even jokes about it. He's like, "I was married for 7 years to this woman and I spent the rest of my life paying for it." She made sure she milked every dime out of Errol. And, there's a lot of people that would probably say what goes around comes around, because he cheated on her left and right. And she had a crazy temper, but that didn't help. The day after Christmas, JL receives another memo, this one from producer Jerry Wald. Quote, "Dear JL, for your information, on Saturday I sent, as requested by Errol Flynn, a final script on Don Juan to his house by special messenger." End quote. Flynn is directed to report on January 11th, 1945 for makeup and wardrobe tests, but soon thereafter he takes a powder and heads out of town. On February 4th, JL cables Flynn in care of Freddie McAvoy, his actor friend, in New York City, demanding that he return to work. The next several weeks involve a cat and mouse game with Flynn avoiding the project, one day claiming dental problems and the next, quote, "undulant fever," end quote. Then a strike hits Hollywood and shuts down production at Warner's into 1946. The project involving Flynn as Don Juan is shelved. Only a few wardrobe and makeup stills remain to give a hint of how Flynn might have played Don Juan when he was still in something resembling his prime. After that project was shelved, Don Juan, they reignite it and they film it with him as the lead, and he's noticeably more haggard and aged looking just 3 or 4 years later after they shelved Don Juan in 1946. And that's what happens when you got a lot of hard living. So it says, at a December 1945 party hosted by David Selznick, a drunk Errol Flynn makes an unkind remark to John Huston, who is dating Olivia de Havilland. And that's the famous director, John Huston, father of Angelica Huston. I was like, what's her name? Angelica. So John Huston is dating Olivia de Havilland, Errol's 7 or 8 time screen co-star, and they were kind of secretly in love with each other, although Olivia was really right and smart to stay away from Errol because she knew that she couldn't get involved with him because it would just be an emotional roller coaster, and she wasn't prepared to handle it. So she's with the director John Huston at the time, and I guess Errol is drunk, makes an unkind remark, and then Huston's demand that they step outside begins one of the classic brawls in Hollywood history and leaves Flynn the victor, and both men broken and bloodied. Olivia has left Flynn behind and is in love with John Huston, and booze seems to bring out Flynn's resentment or insecurity or remorse to the surface. Olivia says later, quote, "I don't know what the remark was, but Errol might have tried to provoke John," end quote. Errol must have been spoiling for trouble, says John Huston in his memoirs, and Zelnick is furious that the incident has wrecked his party. The back and forth nighttime brawl is well documented, sending both men to the hospital. The next day, according to Huston, a now sober Flynn calls to see how he's doing. The fight is but one of dozens of endeavors in which mean drunk Flynn participated. Yes, there's a lot of accounts that he was a particularly mean drunk, that he just would say really nasty things to people, and he had a penchant for getting into fistfights as well when he was drunk. So, but by the same token too, everyone was like, he didn't hold grudges. He, apologized quickly. Apparently he, I guess, phoned up Huston the very next day, apologizing and wanted to see how he was. So it says, so this fight is one of dozens because Flynn is a mean drunk. He wins most, including the Huston bout, by decision, but loses some as well, depending on the opponent and level of intoxication. Under the headline, quote, "Actor Flynn down for short count in one punch fight," end quote, a newspaper article from the previous year tells of an encounter at Sonia Henny's birthday party. Late in the evening, after most guests have departed, Flynn says the wrong thing to Henny in front of her husband, Marine Captain Dan Topping, one of Errol's tennis pals. "I guess he hit me and I went down," says a sheepish and sober, say that twice, sheepish and sober Flynn the next day. And then there is a picture of Errol in his Don Juan costume for the first fitting and prop, fitting in test photos that they do before they film. And it says, a 35-year-old Errol Flynn poses in early Don Juan publicity photos taken in January 1945. So this is 2 years after he was acquitted. And you can tell he's already starting to age, as the picture was due to commence production. So this is January 45. A series of circumstances will lead to a 2.5-year delay in shooting. By the time Errol Flynn made Adventures of Don Juan from October 1947 to April 1948, oh, okay, so the project wasn't shelved for 3 to 4 years, it was only about 2. Which makes it even worse because look how much he's aging because of his lifestyle just in 2 years, right? So that this picture is from January 1945. So they actually begin production of The Adventures of Don Juan from October 47 to April 48. And by that time, the book says he was an alcohol and drug addicted shell of his former vibrant self. One can only wonder how a younger Flynn would have fared in portraying the legendary lover. And then there's another picture here in the chapter that shows Nora Eddington, and she is cute as a little button there, Nora Eddington. And it says, when Nora Eddington first hit the Hollywood scene in 1943, that's when he started bringing her around as pals and stuff at Mulholland Farm. Flynn's friends told her that she had a face for motion pictures, but Nora settled on being Mrs. Errol Flynn and made just one appearance in a film, the closing scene of Adventures of Don Juan, released just 2 months before their divorce was announced. So then it says, Clark Gable will get to know Flynn in the late 1940s and calls him, quote, a colorful bastard, tough as nails, end quote. It would be nice but inaccurate to see Errol Flynn as Mel Brooks will choose to memorialize him in the movie My Favorite Year. So yeah, I know that is an 80s movie, a Mel Brooks 80s movie, My Favorite Year, and it's supposed to be a caricature of Errol, the character Alan Swan. But the people that really knew him say that really wasn't him. He was a lot more dramatic and a lot more pensive and a lot more dark, I think, especially when he was going through everything he was going through in his life after the rape trial. So it says, so Mel Brooks chose to memorialize him as this loving, self-aware, sanguine, funny drunk. And the author's saying that wasn't Flynn. Because if the surface were to be scraped off the Mel Brooks character, Alan Swan, which is the name of the character in the movie, his sweet, remorseful sadness would ooze out. Scratch the veneer on Errol Flynn and anger bubbles underneath. So he's angry at everyone. It says, angry at Mother and Lily, at the Los Angeles DA, at Betty and Peggy, the two girls that were claiming that he raped them. He's angry at the press, at J.L. Warner, and at Nora. His life is a shambles, with the Flynn-Eddington marriage hitting the rocks early and often. He rings in the new year of 1946 by painting the town with Ida Lupino, a woman he openly and completely adores. So he's married to Nora, and I don't know if she had the baby by that time, but he married her. He married her when she was pregnant. Nora does her own carousing with actor Robert Hutton. So the chapter has a picture of the Los Angeles Examiner newspaper, and it's talking about the John Huston fight he got in. And it says, one of the world's arch villains is put to death, and the 1,000-year Reich is crumbling. But good heavens, Flynn was in a brawl. And they're talking about Himmler there, one of the arch villains of the Nazi Party in World War II. So going back to, Errol is partying with Ida Lupino, an actress, for, what did they say, for New Year's Eve? Oh yeah, to ring in 1946. And it says, the Flynn-Lupino relationship is deep and interesting, and of all Flynn's women, it is Idis or Lupi, his two pet names for her, who comes closest to being his idea of a baroness for Mulholland. Ida says of Flynn, he'd call and say, Lupi, come over here. There's a daughter and her mother and a deputy here. Come help. And I'd go up and throw him out. She adds, can you imagine him having to rape anyone? Lupino and Flynn have grown up together at Warner Brothers and finally get the opportunity to work together in the melodrama Escape Me Never. By now, Flynn is smitten, but his life is complicated enough already. The last thing he needs, on top of a teenage bride and a baby, is a scandalous relationship with one of his co-stars. It seems likely that Flynn cares so much about his Idis that the last thing he wants to do is ruin her life by imposing Errol Flynn on her. And he actually does say that in My Wicked, Wicked Ways. He talks about he cared for Ida so much that he almost wanted to save her from him. He just refused to put her name through the mud and get her embroiled in any type of controversy. So he chronicles in his autobiography that they were very, clandestine. Like they would just meet secretly and they would spend days and weeks together at a time, but under the radar, completely under the radar. And then there is Flynn's second novel called Charlie Bowtie Comes to America, which was retitled by the publisher to be called Showdown. And he had been writing that book in late night sessions at Mulholland since the varnish was barely dry in the den. When the book is released early in 1946, critics hate the purple prose and the gritty South Seas plot. Time magazine says, quote, it features lusts, busts, tropic moons, and cheesecake, end quote. During interviews arranged by the publisher, Flynn said he is toying with the idea of acting less and writing more, but the critics scuttle this plan, and although the Flynn name sells great quantities of Showdown in both hardcover and paperback, he considers the effort a failure. It will take him 5 years to complete another novel, and he will never get to writing it. And Errol famously said that if he had his choice, he would have loved to have been a successful writer rather than an actor. He journaled a lot when he was young. He was, even for about a 2-week span, a correspondent for the Spanish Civil War before World War II happened. Just went to the front lines and started writing about it. It got so bad that J.L. Warner, the head of Warner Brothers, had to call him back from the front of the Spanish Civil War, where Errol just decided that, he was going to work for William Randolph Hearst and start writing as a war correspondent while he's in the middle of being a Hollywood actor. And seriously, I said this before in other episodes, he really just didn't really care about being an actor. He liked the money and the privilege that it afforded him, but that's pretty much it. He wasn't really he wasn't really into the whole Hollywood thing. He just liked the freedom and the money that it provided him. So, and he would have vastly preferred to have been a successful writer. He was very, very smart, and he was a very intelligent man, self-taught basically. And yeah, I don't know. I find it kind of sad that he never really felt like he realized his dream of being a writer, although his autobiography was published after his death and was one of the most successful autobiographies of all time. So, you know, he did get some success, but he wasn't around to see it the way that he wanted it. So yeah, so Flynn's toying with the idea of acting less, writing more, but the critics scuttle this plan, and although the Flynn name sells great quantities of Showdown in hardcover and paperback, he considers the effort a failure. He turns on himself, as revealed in his autobiography. "You are an imposter, Flynn," he remembers thinking. "In real life, you don't do any of the things you do on the screen." A little later, he writes, "That which I had, my big house, my yacht, my bank account, seemed hollow. None of these could take the place of self-respect, which I had lost." And I'll read you a little bit from his autobiography along this vein, why I really do feel like he just gave up. He will say that he is not seeking sympathy, but rather, "I am only explaining why I was ready to blow my brains out." He describes 3 successive nights spent at Mulholland, sitting on his bed, holding a revolver at some points with the muzzle in his mouth. Unlike other Hollywood suicides, he will not pull the trigger. Not right away, but his decision to live on sets the course for the remaining 13 years of his life as he slowly and deliberately kills himself. And there's a picture in the chapter of Errol, and it says, "The once flawless face is now held together with makeup as thick as mortician's wax to hide dissipation, yet sadness permeates in this Warner Brothers portrait. The trial, booze and drugs, fistfights, the humiliation of a 4F classification, and various ailments were adding up." The 4F classification prevented him from serving in any branch of the military during the war, and that was one of also his biggest regrets and I think torments. Was he's a very athletic guy that really sought adventure, and he really, really wanted to fight in the war effort, but the tuberculosis, the recurring malaria, he had an enlarged heart, he had a lot of problems and a lot of sicknesses that he acquired in the jungles of New Guinea that he carried with his, during his entire life, and he couldn't serve. It was a big point of contention for him, especially because on screen he was represented as such an active, virile adventurer, but yet it was always a little bit of a weird thing in the public, because they were like, why is a swashbuckler adventurer like Errol not serving? Like what is going on? And then there's another picture of Errol sitting at his typewriter, and it says, "He would say later that he did all his writing at the desk in his den. There I often sat on weekends when I barred the doors and wrote or tried to write. The manuscript grew and grew, and the publisher became alarmed at what was being forwarded. Fearing libel suits at the thinly veiled Hollywood characters and situations, the latter half of the book was excised. Charlie Bowtie never did make it to America, thanks to Sheraton House, which released the novel retitled Showdown in 1946. So that's the one that, did achieve some measure of success, but again, nothing that Errol was overly proud of. This part of the book talks about Errol's love of writing and how he just yearned to be a successful and respected writer. It says, he wanted to be a writer. He wanted his tombstone to read, "They read my stuff." But he was Errol Flynn, the guy who lacked focus and discipline, the guy who drank and caroused, the guy who ran off to Acapulco and later to Jamaica on a whim, a guy who spent a portion of each and every day in the ardent pursuit of female flesh. Well, isn't that true? Flynn had made his first buck from writing by selling short articles about New Guinea to the Sydney Bulletin. Influenced by Kipling and Robert Louis Stevenson, his early prose charmed the reader and painted vivid pictures. It took Flynn a year to write his first book, Beam Ends, released in 1937, at a tidy 241 pages. That's only 2 years into his monumental success in Hollywood. A lot of people probably would have just, ridden the coattails of being a movie star and not worried about, writing to make money or to build a reputation as a writer. But he was really, he was it in Hollywood in 1937, and he still released a book that's 241 pages. That's pretty impressive. I'm impressed. It says, the book proved a critical and commercial success and led Flynn to begin another. In the meantime, he was also contributing articles to Photoplay magazine and writing for other magazines as well. As he began his second book, a novel, he had a lot going on, from a crazy wife to a 6-day-a-week production schedule at Warner Brothers to the development of the Mulholland property. And at that time, that crazy wife they're referencing was Lily Demita. I always say her name like that, Lily Demita. Flynn brought his manuscript to Mulholland when he moved in late 1941. For a year, Mary Ann Hyde typed up his scribblings. That was an 18-year-old that he plucked from Beverly Hills High School to be his live-in secretary. She was there for, I don't know, a little under a year. He says, I write my stuff in longhand. It was the sloppiest copy you ever saw. So this poor girl apparently had to type it. Then came the little matter of the rape trial of 1943, and Flynn put his novel away, but penned a tribute to John Barrymore that he submitted to the New Yorker, which rejected it, a stinging blow to one Hollywood star writing of another. Flynn picked up his novel again after he begun dating Nora Eddington, who took on the task of typing Flynn's copy. Well, he just gets all his girls to be his secretary, doesn't he? Over the years, the book went through a number of titles until Flynn settled on Charlie Bowtie Comes to America. The setting was the South Seas, with the hero coming to Hollywood to find fame and fortune. His publisher was Sheridan House of New York. After the rape trial, his mood turned darker, and he began channeling his frustrations with the studio bosses, with the press, and with life in general into the writing of his novel. And in that picture that I showed you, he's taking a break during one of his film shoots from the film Escape Me Never. And he's just typing a letter. And it says that his faithful pal Moody seems keenly interested in what the boss will type next. I thought that was a pretty cute picture. It is likely that Flynn was devastated to see his work not just edited, but with whole sections deleted. That was that novel, Charlie Bowtie. He said later, the book made no great impact on the field of literature, but it answered a need in myself. He braced himself for the reviews, aware as he was that censorship had ruined the prose. Critically, I am bound to be slaughtered. If the reviewers do like it, they'll probably say it was written by somebody else. I mean, and that's kind of true. I mean, a reputation like in Like Flynn, there are going to be people out there that don't like you that will sabotage pretty much everything you do. And I mean, I'm sorry. I mean, he had to probably at that point come to accept that. The most interesting character in Showdown bears the unlikely name of Cleo Carnell, a fiery blonde actress who, except for hair color, seems the spitting image of Lily Demita, from her strange accent to her wryly arched eyebrow, cascading locks, undulating walk, and a head held high and arrogantly. Except in this alternate universe, the Flynn-based hero tames the lily-like shrew, and at Fade Out, it's clear they will live domestically ever after. This was probably the publisher's version, not Flynn's, because after the divorce, Errol displayed no obvious affection for Demita at all, as she kept constant legal pressure on him through his attorney Robert Ford and through Warner Brothers to make alimony payments. When visiting with their son Sean, the ex-spouses tried not to even look at one another. With Showdown behind him, Flynn began another novel that may have incorporated Charlie Bowtie's Hollywood adventures, but the manuscript went nowhere. Instead, he turned to writing in a journal and penned some articles for Screen Guide magazine. He claimed credit for the dreadful screenplay to an independent film called Adventures of Captain Fabian, and also developed the script for his Italian epic William Tell, a film that was never completed. Based on existing evidence, the screenplay as a writing discipline was not a strength for Errol Flynn. So it seems like he was better at writing novels and autobiographies than he was at screenplays. Around 1957, Flynn signed a deal with G.P. Putnam's Sons in New York to write his autobiography. By this time, he had spent 15 years living a life of purposeful debauchery and found his natural lack of focus compounded to such an extent that he simply could not do the job. He was a natural storytelling writer who, with great frustration and sadness, realized that he could no longer do the thing he loved. And I can attest, this thing is a page turner. This is one of those books where you start reading it and you're laying in bed, you start at whatever time, and you look and you're like, how long have I been reading? It's good. It's really good. Okay, it says California writer Earl Conrad, Earl, E-A-R-L, not Errol, helped Flynn finish the book, which would become My Wicked, Wicked Ways, and it is assumed that the actual writing was all Conrad, as spoken by Flynn. It is clear, however, that the exercise of spending months with Conrad dictating the book in Jamaica reawakened Flynn's enthusiasm for the craft, because his subsequent long, engaging letters to the ghostwriter included new passages and revisions to old ones. Flynn wanted to leave a good book for posterity, and as honest an account of his life as he could allow, excepting that he did not admit to mean drunk rages and dependence on cocaine and morphine. My Wicked, Wicked Ways was published after Flynn's death and continues to be reprinted today. His tombstone does not bear the inscription, "They read my stuff," but after a half-century, people are continuing to read his stuff, making him, in retrospect, the successful writer that he always longed to be. Yeah, well, unfortunately, he never saw it. And there's another picture of Errol holding his second novel, posing next to a globe, and it says, "Sitting in his den at Mulholland Farm, near the desk where he had written it, author Errol Flynn points out the locale of his new novel, Showdown." So yeah, that was the little part in the book where they're talking about his writing skills, what he wrote, and his love of writing. So the last thing that we were talking about before the writing subtopic, where it's talking about how dark and how pensive he was, what just like a dark night of the soul Errol was going through. And he describes that he contemplated suicide at least in 3 different occasions at Mulholland Farm. And remember, it said his decision to live on sets the course for the remaining 13 years of his life as he slowly and deliberately kills himself. So to end out the chapter, Errol says, "It left me with a sense of abandon. I didn't give a damn what I did, where I went, what happened to me. I said to myself, nothing matters now. Do as you damned well please." The change shows in his face and in his work. He will drink more, with vodka the liquor of choice. According to Nora, he will rely on injections of cocaine to ease the pain. Oh, he had notoriously, he had back problems, like really, really bad back problems. He had been thrown from a lot of horses during a lot of his action films, and I think obviously, that's what did it. He walks through his Warner's pictures, his eyes dead, his delivery flat, for the next 5 years. He will rally briefly, as with his attempts at depth of character in Escape Me Never and Cry Wolf, but these will be panned by critics. Where's the old Flynn? Where's the horse? Where's the sword? Where's the grin and the girl? I guess this is what these critics are saying. In her book, Errol and Me, Nora Eddington documents a Flynn both charming and cruel. They marry in 1944 in Mexico so that the child she is carrying will have a name. Then the relationship becomes de facto, accepted in Hollywood without a press release, although he continues to deny that they're married. And Nora does say in interviews and articles that I've read from her back in the day, like in the archives and stuff, that was really, really painful for her. The fact that he couldn't admit that they were married for the first part of their marriage. I think it was months before he even admitted to the fact that they were married. But yet she was also even somewhat painfully just accepting of, this is just who he is. And, there's no part of me that ever thinks that I can entrap this man. I'm in love with him. I love him, but there's no way I'm going to experience domestic bliss with Errol Flynn. He's just, that's just who he is. That's his nature. He adds a wing onto Mulholland House next to the den in 1945, another downstairs bedroom that includes a spread of mirrors on the ceiling. We talk about that in one of the episodes too, so you got to get on this playlist if you haven't. Above this room is an unfinished attic accessed by an exterior staircase. In the attic is a trap door that opens into one panel of glass in a ceiling of mirrors, two-way glass. Unlike the secret bar passageway leading to an equally secret closet of a room for voyeur pleasures, this new feature of Mulholland becomes the talk of Hollywood. Supposedly, Flynn uses this gag two-way mirror only once, according to Errol. That's what he said, only once. He used it on Bruce Cabot, who is furious at being spied on, although many others will claim to be privy to the mirror and the antics of Flynn in using it. The strange addition onto Mulholland House incorporates an entertainment area downstairs. The bedroom with the two-way mirror can also be used as a movie theater, and upstairs he adds a small nursery. Yeah, that's the least you can do. Add a nursery for your dang kid, Errol, okay? By 1946, Flynn has learned multiple times that there are consequences to the conquest of inexperienced teenagers. After the romance is flamed out, he's left with a wife, soon to become a plaintiff. Actor Robert Stack recounts a miserable dinner he spends at Mulholland with Errol and Nora. And Robert Stack, he's from Unsolved Mysteries, not the new one, the one from the 80s. That he's the host. He said, quote, "After a couple of hours, the dialogue rose to this. What can you do with a bastard like that?" Nora would demand. "It takes a bitch to know a bastard," Flynn would respond. Finally, the battle came to an end with Nora shouting, "We don't have one damn thing in common." As if on cue, Errol jumped out of the chair, ran upstairs, ran back down, and threw a monstrous rubber dildo onto the middle of the table. "We have one. I went home," end quote. That's really gross. Okay. Flynn buys a new yacht, the Zaka, and leaves his home to sail the Pacific and Atlantic. On one of his adventures, he discovers Jamaica. Suddenly, Mulholland pales, and Flynn spends less time there. Alex also packs his bags now that the parade of women have stopped and the boss is cutting back on spending. Flynn hires Nora's stepmother, Marge Eddington, to succeed Alex. And Alex was his Russian valet / butler / carousing buddy, all that stuff. Marge Eddington comes down strongly in Flynn's camp. Quote, "Mr. Eddington and I haven't seen Nora in some time. I don't mean we've deserted her. And I don't mean we don't love her, but I am devoted to Errol. He's been very kind to me, and both Mr. Eddington and I wish that Nora would reconsider this divorce action." So I guess by that time they were, divorcing. The divorce is finalized in June 1949 and will leave behind two daughters, Deirdre, born January 10th, 1945, and Rory, born March 12th, 1947, children that Flynn adores. He can't get along with Nora, and certainly not with Lily, but he excels with his children at Mulholland and at the studio. Nora describes in detail Flynn's addiction to cocaine and morphine and his physical abuse of her while under the influence. She tells a story that mirrors the description by Steve Hayes, who, as an aspiring actor, lives with Flynn at Mulholland for a month. Later in 1949, quote, "Sober, I've never met a more congenial guy. When he drank, very mean, dreadful, spiteful to people. He'd say nasty things. For a guy who was full of hell and fun and seemed like a man's man, you hate when he becomes spiteful," end quote. Flynn is out of control. J.L. Warner believes he can perform a rescue and puts Flynn back with a leading lady he likes a lot and with a director who has handled him best. Errol Flynn is cast in the post-Civil War Western called Silver River, playing another anti-hero, as is now common in these days that are darkened by the emerging Soviet menace. Raoul Walsh will direct. Ann Sheraton will co-star, with able support from Flynn's pal of the Bundy Drive boys, Thomas Micheal. And after that, Errol Flynn will return to Swashbucklers with the long-delayed picture about the great lover, Don Juan. It seems like a wonderful plan as J.L. sits in his office in Burbank, one that he can't miss. But Warner underestimates his bad boy, and the plan will blow up and steer Flynn's career and his life straight into the rocks. And there are so many pictures in this chapter, you guys. This one shows him on the set of one of his World War II dramas, and it says, Errol Flynn turned actor-producer for his 1944 World War II drama, Uncertain Glory, playing a conniving French criminal. His strong and subtle performance, however, was betrayed by an uneven script. Flynn was involved in the casting of the picture and had an eye for the ladies, such as Warner starlet Faye Emerson, she's in the picture with him, but not for screenplays. A lack of understanding of the importance of the script would spell trouble for his career down the road in pictures like Adventures of Captain Fabian and William Tell. And there's also a picture of Nora at Mulholland House with Errol. And it says, the relationship between Errol and Nora was fractured from the start. She was a clerk and he was Errol Flynn. After the rape trial, he refused to acknowledge their relationship publicly, and the marriage was kept secret. Nora was a frequent guest at the house and played hostess at her coming out party in 1945 above, but she was never the Baroness of Mulholland. So it took a while, but this picture is from her coming out party. So basically when he finally acknowledged her as his wife. And there's also a picture of Errol with Ida Lupito, the one who, remember the book said that she came as close as possible to his idea of a baroness for Mulholland House. And he really, really, by all accounts, adored Ida, but he was almost kind of protecting her from him. And it says, Flynn shares an embrace with Ida Lupino in 1946 during production of Escape Me Never. Lupino was a frequent guest at Mulholland throughout the 1940s. One friend stated that she and Flynn clearly adored one another. The porcelain beauty Lupino was one woman to whom Flynn was completely devoted, without even a hint of the underlying hostility he displayed towards his mother and his wives. Perhaps Flynn's self-awareness that he was a marriage killer kept him from popping the question to Lupino and ruining their otherwise perfect relationship. And then there is also a little section in here of Errol posing in front of his famous John Decker self-portrait that he had over one of his fireplaces. And it says, Errol Flynn by John Decker. In a living room that featured originals by Manet, the painting placed front and center was the Flynn portrait by artist John Decker, a prominent member of Hollywood society since the early 30s and a founding member of a group of broken down, booze-soaked actors, writers, and artists known as the Bundy Drive Boys. Prominent in the group were John Barrymore, Gene Fowler, Thomas Micheal, and W.C. Field. Pat O'Brien referred to them as the Royal John Decker Rat Pack and described them this way. They claimed to be intellectuals, and yet their conversation was often about their victories over women and their expensive ways of life. Decker liked Flynn and helped him acquire his Manet and Van Gogh, or perhaps painted one or more for him, as Decker is thought to have been a magnificent forger. Decker completed the portrait of Flynn soon after the rape trial, and Flynn placed this cherished possession above the fireplace in the living room. That year, the Decker painting was featured in the press materials for Northern Pursuit, with exhibitors encouraged to offer prizes for a competition among local art students to reproduce the work. In 1945, Ben Hite wrote about the portrait for Esquire, and he said, Decker not only gets a true likeness down with one of the swiftest, sharp-shooting brushes in modern art, but he also introduces into his portraits a full Freudian biography of the celebrity involved. Beauty, male or female, is a nasty handicap to an artist. Paint as you will, its conventional symmetric will dominate the canvas and spell dull flattery rather than art. In this portrait of Flynn, Decker has done one of his subtlest biographies. The handsomeness is there to the last perfect curve. Without disturbing a line of the celebrated face, Decker has added to it the story of a troubled soul peering out of weary eyes. Under the analytic Decker brush, Flynn's chin grows gentle. The mouth, whose smile has enchanted millions, grows full of fretfulness. It is not a glamour boy who looks from the campus, but a tormented fellow with a dislike for himself and the world. Very, very true. Very, very true. And there is also a section in here about Errol being the master of Mulholland and how he participated in the war effort. And it says, World War II hit Europe and the Pacific like a California brush fire. Errol Flynn tried to enlist in 1942 only to be turned away for medical reasons that included malaria and TB. He traveled to Washington, D.C. on appeal and received no help. He ended up at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, where he was diagnosed with an enlarged heart. James Stewart, Tyrone Power, Robert Montgomery, and others went to fight in the war, even Flynn's pal, Bruce Cabot. And the screen's greatest adventure hero in the prime of his life at age 33 remained home and instead spent his time fighting the law in a courtroom. Errol says, everybody else was in this up to their necks, he said, meaning the war, and I haven't been able to find anything to do, no place to fit in, nothing that I felt would do anybody any good. So yeah, what did I tell you? It really, really bothered him that he could not fight in the war. He tried to enlist and he just kept getting turned down. I think every branch turned him down. In November 1943, Errol Flynn joined the USO and embarked on a 10,000-mile, 6-week tour of the Aleutian Islands. And it was there that a USO camp show featuring Errol Flynn, Universal player Marcia O'Driscoll, singer Ruth Carroll, guitarist Jimmy Dodd, and magician Harry Mendoza saw them island hopping across the volcanic specks of land from Dutch Harbor west to Attu near the mainland of the Soviet Union. Before the first stop, a commander warned, quote, they feel out of touch with the whole world. They hate themselves, they hate each other, and they hate everything. That's why those USO tours were such a big deal back then, because they really, really did boost the morale of all the soldiers. The act consisted of singing, dancing, and comedy invented by the troupe. They performed up to 5 shows a day. Flynn appeared on stage to begin the show and recited the first lines of the William F. Service poem, The Shooting of Dan McGrew. And there's a picture of Errol with all of the performers, and it says, "And so it went as they hopped the islands, the troupe lavished with attention by men who hate everything, and Flynn feeling like an imposter who must be resented by these servicemen. A look at the photos from the tour begs the question, why is this man smiling? The answer may be found in the girl attached to his arm, Martha O'Driscoll." And there's a picture of Martha, and it says she had kicked around Hollywood since the 30s. For years, she was linked to Warner stock player William Lyttigan, but in 1943, she wed a naval officer in a marriage that steered straight into the rocks. She was all of 21, just the way Flynn liked him, and trapped with Hollywood's bad boy for 6 lonely weeks. And there's another picture, and it says, in 1947, O'Driscoll finally filed for divorce from the Navy flyer, who, in a cross complaint, said the Alaska trip with Flynn was highly improper and a reason for their failed marriage. Film historian John Micheal, host of the Greenbrier Picture Shows, says, most women realize that if they got involved with Flynn, Bruce Cabot would have been winking at them from the next booth at Suro's. I guess it's a restaurant. But on the road, you're Martha O'Driscoll, and you're far from home. There's no one to answer to, no one to pass judgment. Celebrities on long USO tours paired off and had affairs and then went home and forgot about it. Flynn chose not to mention the allusions in My Wicked, Wicked Ways, and O'Driscoll chose to forget her entire Hollywood career when she married a millionaire and retired from the screen 3 years after that Alaska trip. She did, however, participate in an interview with a magazine writer that became the article titled My 6 Weeks with Errol Flynn, in which she admitted to, quote, the most poignant memories of my life, end quote. In short, what happened in Alaska stayed in Alaska, leaving behind only a travelogue of still photos showing Flynn with a glint in his eye and a flushed Martha O'Driscoll clinging to his arm. And then it shows a picture of Errol introducing fencers at a big Hollywood party at Mulholland House, and it says he introduces the fencers at his party for Nora Eddington. As always, Moody, the faithful schnauzer, is not far away from his master. And then it shows Nora and Gary Cooper and his wife and a bunch of others looking on at this fencing match that Errol is putting on in front of the pool at Mulholland House. It said among the guests were Gary Cooper holding a sword, his wife Rocky in sunglasses, helmet dentine seated on the step, and Raoul Walsh, the director, when he directed a lot of Errol's movies, wearing an eye patch in the background by the window. So that is the chapter 6 in Like Flynn, and there is one little bit I wanted to read you from My Wicked, Wicked Ways to give you an idea of the dark place that Errol was in his life after the rape trial. But it gives you an idea into his mindset. So Errol begins, ostensibly, I won the case. The people had vindicated me. There was applause for the verdict, and the crowds thronged into the theaters to see my pictures and get a double laugh. To laugh at the film fair and to enjoy seeing the man who gave them so much entertainment over and beyond the call of picture making. He's talking about how he basically felt like he was entertainment for the world during his trial. A new legend was born, and new terms went into the national idiom. A GI or Marine or sailor went out at night, sparking, and the next day he reported to his cronies, who asked him how he made out the night before, and the fellow would say with a sly grin, I'm in like Flynn. I picked up some letters that I had written to my father from New Guinea many years earlier. I asked him to send me a few of those letters. I wanted to look back at what I was in the lonely jungle of the deep Pacific and compare myself with what I was now and see which figure I liked better. At that time, I wanted so much to live. In October of 1931, I wrote to him, my father, from Lakoe Tobacco Plantation, where I had just built a furnace and concrete firebox inside a tobacco curing barn. I thought I built it very well, and I said in the letter, this one is all right, though, and should still be here in 200 years' time, barring earthquakes. It is a depressing thought to consider that at the end of that period of time, I shall most probably not be here to enjoy the fruits of this labor. So that's him writing in 1931 to his father. And Errol says, at that time, I regretted I wouldn't be around 200 years later, and that was how interested I was at living. But now, sitting around Mulholland, those first thoughts of death, destruction, and suicide begin to occur within me, which would not early or easily or perhaps ever vanish. I no longer had such an interest in living. I didn't give a damn, in fact. Much of the will to live had gone. In a way, I had conquered the forces of life rather young. I had fame, fortune, and nature had given me a unique physique. I even had luck. I had everything, ostensibly. And yet I knew I had lost. I knew that I could never escape this brand that was now upon me, that I would always be associated in the public mind with an internationally followed rape case. So yes, he was very, very conscious of what that meant, the impact of that for his life. And reading this autobiography, reading, biographers talk about him, watching documentaries on him, I really do think that, like a lot of celebrities of today, and again, I'm not excusing Errol's behavior, a lot of it was despicable, but I'm saying that he knew that everything was lost in the mind of, so many. He was basically just a phallic symbol. He was kind of a joke, in Like Flynn. He would never, ever, ever get away from that rape trial reputation that he had acquired. And I don't think that it tormented him just from a kind of fame and fortune monetary standpoint. I think that he was deeply troubled, the depths of what he had become. I think he was genuinely upset and discouraged of himself. He really almost couldn't believe that he could lower himself that much. And I think that was just the impetus for just him giving up entirely. It's sad to think that he really felt that, I couldn't get as low as I did, so I might as well stay down here in the muck. That's really what I believe happened to Errol and his entire psyche after that rape trial. So the next chapter, chapter 7, is going to be titled Tiger Lil's Revenge, talking about Lily Demita and how she made it her life's mission after their 7-year marriage and subsequent divorce to basically squeeze every dime out of Errol that she could. And you'll see later on in his story that he basically just leaves America and goes to Europe to try to escape this woman. It is that bad. So I really do hope you guys enjoyed this one. The book is super interesting. I'm loving spending this time and reading this with you, and I will talk to you very, very soon. Bye.